All right, here we go. What is the date of Jesus' birth?
We don't know.
We don't know. Okay. Anybody want to speculate on when and how they would go about making that argument too?
Summer.
Summer, okay.
You mean date of the time
I'm
of year
specific
again?
date.
Okay.
Obviously December 25th.
Okay. What year? You want to just add a year? Nope. Okay. That's fine. Now, there's a few main components that drives this discussion on when Jesus was potentially born. First is that you have to deal with the date of Herod the Great's death, because both Matthew and Luke clearly have Jesus being born while Herod was still alive. So, knowing when Herod died, acts as the primary driver, as Jesus' birth would have come obviously before this. Next is the discussion, or you probably could say, if you get into this, is the debate over Luke's census. And this census is said that it made Mary and Joseph go to Bethlehem to register for. And finally is determining what the star was that the Magi, or wise men, were tracking on. This celestial sign is pertinent to our Revelation study that we're doing right now, as we have read a lot about stars in certain contexts, symbolically representing angels, but also can refer to the actual cosmos. Also, at the very end of the book, when we get there, Jesus refers to himself as the bright morning star, which is what he told the church at Thyatira that he would give them if they overcame. And back in Revelation 12, is that we had celestial language that was used in association with Jesus' birth. This is definitely about Jesus because before and after this, we know that Jesus is the one that is to rule the nations with a rod of iron. So we get the rod of iron language in all three situations. What you might not have caught before is that in Luke 178, Zacharias is recorded prophesying of the Messiah with sunrise language. And Peter, in 2 Peter 1:19, calls Jesus the day star that arises in our hearts. Now, all of this begs the question is if these descriptions are in any way related to the wise men's star. So, have I sparked anyone's curiosity now at this point? Yes, good. Now, before addressing the date of Herod's death, is that we need to be aware of what Luke said in chapter 3, because in 3:1 has the only chronological syncing statement in all of the New Testament. He says that John the Baptist's ministry started in the 15th year of Tiberius, and also within this section is that he says Jesus began his ministry when he was about 30 years old after John baptized him. So, how this works is that we have to go looking for the 15th year of Tiberius, his reign. And if you look at the chart here, you can see that he started in 14 AD. Now, the simple would be like, okay, add 15 on. But in the ancient world, there's a lot of different ways you count regnal years. Think of our presidency. When does the president start his reign, if you will? January 20th, okay? And so, there's a little overlap always into a next year. The ancients sometimes would start in the spring, sometimes start in the fall, sometimes in the summer, and somehow you have to make sense in reconciling all those when you're comparing them. So what we can do is actually just give a general span of years between 26 to 29 AD as potential years for Jesus starting his ministry. Then, with Jesus being said that he was about 30, is that we can rewind the clock back 30-ish years. And this gives us a window of birth of 5 to 1 BC. Make sense? Okay. Now, with this timeline in mind, is that we can go address Herod the Great's death. If you Googled this, is that overwhelmingly, you will find a result that says that he died in the spring of 4 BC. So, on our timeline is that we can add Herod's supposed death in 4 BC and see that there's an overlap here only between the two of around 5 BC. But at this point in the scholarly world, they start kind of like playing with things and say, what does about 30 really mean? Doesn't sound like Luke really knows exactly when Jesus started. So maybe it's 27, 28, 29 years old. Maybe it's 31, 32, 33. So some will take Luke's about language and give it greater latitude and shift Jesus' date range back to, say, 7 to 4 BC. Now, this sounds reasonable because Matthew said that Herod ordered for all the killing of boys 2 and under in Bethlehem after the wise men said, hey, the Messiah has been born. So he sent for all the 2 and under to be killed. So this is the common argument that you'll hear typically. And the next thing that if you run with this is that they'll start speculating on when the Star of Bethlehem or what was the Star of Bethlehem. And there's generally 3 possibilities in this time frame. You have Saturn and Jupiter conjunctions in 7 BC. You have an eclipse of Jupiter in the Aries constellation, and also that there is a comet that was recorded going through this time in 5 BC. Now, if you remember last year, is that the 7 BC one of Saturn and Jupiter got a lot of attention because last year during the winter solstice, they formed a double planet. It was visible to anybody in the world. And many headlines took this and just started to discuss the potential of this actually being the Star of Bethlehem. And if you know your astronomy, is that famous astronomer Johannes Kepler actually took this view when he was looking into the star debate for himself. Now, this looks attractive, but the whole argument starts with one thing. The idea that Herod's death is correctly dated in the spring of 4 BC. Now, anybody who would take the 4 BC would be like, what do you mean, Brett? Everyone knows that he died in 4 BC. Josephus even dates it to 4 BC. If you hear that claim, that is not true. Josephus, in his 2 main works, writes a lot about Herod and says in both accounts that Herod lived 5 more days after Antipater, his son and heir, was killed by his ordering. So if anyone thinks that, hey, Matthew's account of Massacre of Innocents is just not in the whole scope of Herod, no, he killed his own family plenty of times. Now, Josephus said that Herod died 34 years after ordering Antigonus to be killed and 37 years after he was declared king of Judea by Rome after he conquered the area. And just a little bit before this, he said that there was an eclipse of the moon. The special note here about the eclipse is that this is the only time Josephus records anything about an eclipse in all of his works. Next is that he mentions that the Passover was nearing as well. This helps us because it kind of gives us a scope here of Herod's death occurring between Josephus's one and only eclipse mentioned and the annual spring Passover. Now, when it comes to the eclipse, is that we can go online to NASA, and so this is trustworthy, and look at all observable eclipses throughout anywhere, and this is for Jerusalem between the years 100 BC to 180. And between 10 BC to 5 AD is that we have a list here of partial and total eclipses. So if you're going with a 4 BC date for Herod's death, is that you are going to argue that March 13th partial eclipse was the one that Josephus was referring to. So to simplify this down is that we have all of our eclipses here on the left-hand side and the converted dates of Passover from Nisan, 15th of Nisan into the Gregorian dates, our modern day calendar. So let's just say if you said Herod died in 10 BC, is that you would have to argue that the spring Passover of April 4th, 9 BC is the one that, you're going to say that's where he died in between that span, okay? Now, for the sake of time, though, is that we're going to simplify this down by crossing out the eclipses of 10 to 8 BC because there's just no way you can date Herod's death there, and therefore the other Passovers get eliminated too. This leaves us with the following, but we can even reduce this down more by noticing that 5 of the 8 eclipses occur after the Passover of that given year, and this creates basically a whole year between events going around, and that just isn't workable because Josephus mentioned that Archelaus, and he takes over for Herod eventually, is that he ordered the Roman troops to come in to quell any uprising from the Jews, because at this point they were pretty mad still about Herod, because Herod had killed a number of Jews. Because anybody watch the Bible miniseries? When they get to Jesus' birth, is that the opening scene is them ripping down the Roman eagle from the temple. And so Herod orders all these guys, including priests, to be burnt alive for this. And they're ready to revolt and get rid of Roman persecution. So Archelaus, in haste, he says, I got to get to Rome because I got to get named king, because my brother, he's taken off too, and he wants to be king, and it's just a power vacuum right now. And so this context eliminates the idea of a long gap in time. This had to happen quick. And so what we have here is really down to only 3 possibilities of the eclipse and the Passover. Now, the last one here also gets eliminated because that you can't date Herod's death that late either. And now, I know I'm speaking in a lot of assumptions, but when it comes to Herod's death, there's a lot of debate, and so I'm giving you the very condensed version of this, and we'll talk more about it later on. Now, if you went and read Josephus's accounts, okay, is that he wanted a big, giant, grand funeral for himself because, well, he wanted to be popular, and, how do I force it on everybody? I'll make a big funeral for myself. I want one like King David and Solomon had. And so the gap here in time of 29 days is just not workable when you get into that idea of, he was up in this area, they had to bring him back home, they embalmed his body, the troops had to get in procession, they wanted all the flowers and the whole pomp and circumstance of it all. And historians know that this isn't doable, but we'll see why they kind of avoid it. But this also actually takes us into the next point, which is actually about the eclipse. Because remember, this is the only eclipse that Josephus mentions. And so the March 13th one, if you look at it, is a partial one. And it's actually, when you look at it and you see the magnitude up above, it's that it's the least in magnitude. It's not that impressive. We've all seen eclipses in our lifetime, I think. But if you go look at January 10th, 1 BC, is that it's a total eclipse. And not just that, is that this eclipse, on the right-hand side, they're compared here, was a blood moon. And anybody knows about blood moons in the ancient world is that they saw those as omens. It was either doom and gloom or something big was going to be happening at that time. So when you look at these two and you think about the funeral, which one in general do you think Josephus was alluding to? Which eclipse would he said, hey, remember that eclipse? Which one would have all of his readers remembered? The first or the second? The blood moon. And in regards to Herod's, or Josephus' statement about Herod's dating from 34 years and 37 years from those two events, is that this is where it gets very weedy. Chronology it gets very, very deep. But long story short is that Josephus does date Herod's death to 1 BC. The one example we're going to go through here is Josephus dates Herod's start of his reign in the 7th year in conjunction with the Roman Battle of Actium. Battle of Actium is probably the most famous battle in Roman history. And so you work back, it's 38 BC. And that 37 years from 38 BC lands you at 1 BC. Now, again, there's a lot that can be said about this, and maybe down the road I do a whole Herod death dating discussion. But my final comment on this is that I'm not making this stuff up, okay? There are many well-known and credible scholars who do place Herod's death at 1 BC, after January 10th in late January. I can just inundate you with articles and citations all day long, but I'm sure that would probably get tiresome. And if you do go online and you just look at the Wikipedia page and you dive into this, is that you do see the discussion that 1 BC is a tenable date, and there are modern day scholars that are advocating for this. And this is actually a shift back, because the 4 BC date is actually a modern invention for the last 100 years. Everything up to about the 20th century was always 1 BC for Herod's death. So if you go with 1 BC for Herod's death, which I do, is that then we can take our chart here and move it forward, and now we have a window for Jesus' birth in 3 to 2 BC. And if you look at Luke's start of Jesus' ministry, is that about language? It's not vague, is it? It's precise. And when you go back to the early church writers, is that a very high majority of them placed Jesus' birth in the 3-2 BC range. They all synced it to there. And this timeline exactly connects with Luke's statement about Jesus being 30 years old. So Herod's death in late January 1 BC is our cutoff line for Jesus' birth. Now, if we're talking about the census, is that we can find this actual census of what Luke was talking about actually coming from Augustus himself. In his own autobiography, he talked about how great he was. You see a bunch of titles that he was given by the Roman Senate. And he actually talks about censuses that he held and that they were worldwide and everybody had to be registered for. And that vows, or you could say oaths, had to be given to him, i.e. emperor worship, by the councils and priests every 5th year. So if you go from 8 BC to 5 more years later, you land on 3 BC. But look what he adds next to this. Moreover, all the citizens, both individually and by their towns, of one accord repeatedly made supplication to all the gods' couches for my health. This is exactly what Luke describes taking place in his account of the census. What to notice here is that Augustus held a census prior to him getting a divine title by the Senate. Now, his original name was Octavian. Augustus was an honored title given to him, and that was given to him on February 15th, 2 BC. So the census would come before this. And here he was called the father of the fatherland. And it was given to him by the whole Roman people. That would include the provinces in Judea. This bestowing is also found in Roman historian Suetonius, who wrote the 12 Caesars. He reiterated that the whole body of citizens, with a sudden unanimous impulse, proffered him the title father of his country. It's a divine title. So the whole empire had to revere Augustus in this new title, and Suetonius adds that this first started with the commoners, meaning that their oath-taking would have been done in 3 BC, prior to February 5th, 2 BC. This follows the same pattern that we saw earlier. Now, the next question would be like, okay, but what about Josephus? It always goes back to him and comparing it to Luke. Did he mention a 3-2 BC empire-wide oath? Yes. He says the following. Accordingly, when all the people of the Jews gave assurance of their goodwill to Caesar and to the king's government, these Pharisees did not swear, being about 6,000 of them. Again, notice all the people were made to do this, but there was refusal from 6,000 Pharisees, and there was others as well, because they're like, we're not bowing down to this guy and worshiping him as a god. We're not going to do that. And when you get into that story, you start to see why, because there was starting to be messianic fever, and it starts to link up with Matthew's account of when the wise men came and said, hey, we're here to come, worship the King of the Jews. And what do they say? Herod freaked out, and all Jerusalem was troubled along with. There's a relationship between these. So right there, again, is the 3 BC census that Luke was referring to. Now, when it comes to when would you have done this census, is that Sir William Ramsay, an archaeologist, and he was a non-believer before he actually dived into the Bible, said that the census would have been done between August to October. And that's the best time because you're not going to do it during the winter, kind of cold. You're not going to do it during the spring because it's agricultural season. If you want to do something like this, would you do it during Passover? No, you're going to tick everybody off. So find the time where it's kind of low level to keep this, have this coordinated. So August to October is the best time to do a census. And this time frame works exactly with what Luke said about Jesus' age, and when the census would have been done, would have pushed Mary and Joseph down to Bethlehem. And when you compare Herod's death to the census, that's about what? A year and a half of time, right? Again, what did Herod say? Kill all the boys that are 2 and under. So you can see that there's, again, this is syncing together really well for us. Now, for the star, which I'm sure everybody's kind of like, okay, let's get to the star point now, because that's, back in Revelation again. But remember, we have to know when Herod died so we can kind of get this time frame. So recall that Herod asked the wise men, when did the star appear? He was looking for the exact moment. When did you see the star come? And what he was talking about was the star's helical rising in the east, as Herod was asking for the specific time of when the star appeared. He wants to know exactly, and from that, that's how you get that order of killing boys 2 and under. Go quick, Josh. We're going right into it. A helical rising, or a star rising of a star, occurs annually when it briefly becomes visible above the eastern horizon at dawn, just before sunrise. After it has spent a season behind the sun, rendering it invisible. Okay, and don't worry, I'll clean it up what that exactly all means. So you can see how this matches the description of what the Magi and Herod were saying in their conversation. The Greek word for rising is the same word that was found in Luke 1:7-8 with Zechariah's prophecy, and with 2 Peter 1:19 calling Jesus the day star that arises in our hearts. And this connects with Jesus calling himself the bright morning star at the end of the book of Revelation. And now, got to just go with me on this, is that what the Magi said they exactly saw in the night sky was actually the king planet, Jupiter. Planets, to the ancients, were seen as wandering stars. They didn't have a big telescope like us. They can zoom in on them. Wandering stars because when you look in the night sky, they kind of just float around when you're comparing them versus the constellations are always in a fixed motion going around and around the zodiac or, the ecliptic. And Jupiter makes perfect sense as the star that the Magi were tracking on because in the nighttime it's the third brightest object and behind the moon and Venus. And for the Jews, they actually did observe the stars, and their name for Jupiter was Zedek, which means righteousness in Hebrew. What's interesting is that there are numerous zodiacs that are found in first century Palestine synagogues. And if we zoomed in on you, you'd see that you can see the top left there, the zodiac, so don't worry, it's not astrology. They're just observing the stars. There's a difference between the two. This tells us that they were observing the heavens, which, God said, hey, he made the sun, moon, and stars for signs and seasons in the beginning in Genesis 1:14. Why they would have been doing this is because in Numbers 24:17, Balaam prophesied that a star shall come out of Jacob, a scepter shall rise out of Israel. But take note of the scepter language here because back in Genesis 49, Jacob said that a scepter shall not depart from Judah. This is talking about the Messianic king. Both of these use the same word that's translated as rod in Psalm 2, which in Revelation we see the rod of iron appearing over and over again. So you kind of see how all these ideas are kind of coming together. Now, Jacob said before this that Judah is a lion's whelp. The association of the Messiah with a lion, which we just take for granted. There's only one other place in the Bible that refers to the Messiah as with lion language, and that is Revelation 5:5. And here Jesus is called the Root of David, just like he called himself at the end of Revelation in 22:16. So it's all these ideas, we're connecting dots, what we're doing here. And all their roots are found in the Old Testament too. And so altogether, what we are talking about here is that the star out of Jacob, or out of the tribe of Judah, is talking about the Leo constellation. Now, what's truly wonderful about all this, and you're probably like just kind of like, okay, Brett, you're presenting, you're giving us, kind of your take on all this. Prove it. Okay, I can, because we can go to astronomy software, and you can download this if you would like to. I got to do a little shift for a moment so you can see my screen. And this software is called Stellarium. All right, so if somebody wouldn't mind kicking off all the lights over there, and to help out would be to shut the blinds as well. Okay, so a couple things just to note. I know it's probably tough on this side to see, and it's going to get dark. Okay, so this is probably the best seat in the house. Why I picked it so Mom could watch. But we are looking from Jerusalem at this point. Okay, and you can see that we have the modern date here today. We're at August 8th, and let's just say, if we want to go back and look at last year's conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter, is that we can do that. And so we'll just rewind the clock. And we're seeing here on December 8th, and we are looking for the southwest, and just want to add one more. Okay, so there's Jupiter, there's Saturn. Okay, and now I'm just going to try to do my best to zoom so you guys can see it. And as you can see, is that if we're observing right there, is that these two are starting. Oh, I got to just zoom a little bit out so we're always at the ground level. Day by day at the same time, you can see that they're coming together. And so that's the conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter. And you can just, again, play around with this, and you can see that they're almost over top of each other. My mom took a picture of this last year, I remember, and she sent it to us. And did anybody go outside and look at it? Anybody remember this last year? Okay. It was bright. And even on her picture phone in the daytime, you could see it. It was really bright in the sky. So this is, astronomy software. The beautiful thing is that basically it's a time machine for us. Is that we can go back, we can go forward, because the stars and the motion are always fixed from our vantage point. So thinking back again to the census taking place in August time frame and in 3 BC, is that we're going to shift the date back to, I'm going to just start at 1, okay, and then you see a 0 here. In astronomy, 0 is 1 BC, so this is 2 BC, and this is 3 BC. And so when we go to August,
We left the telephone pole in.
yes, the ancient, okay, and this is where it's going to get dark, because now we're at 3:30 in the morning. Got to get over to the east, because that's the heliacal rising that we're looking for. And we want some, let's see here, we want the constellation art. So now you can see the constellations and working. And now we're just going to watch what the Magi would have seen that morning. And there's what? There's Jupiter right there if you can't see it. And this looks like what? Leo. And here we are right before sunrise. Now, during the time, of a given period, these things are going to cycle over each other and whatnot. And what really makes a heliacal rising is the fact that, I know this is going to be tough, but there's like the distance between, or the degree difference between a given star, or in this case, planet Jupiter, to the sun. It needs to be 12 degrees. And this is the 12-degree difference with that. And so this is the heliacal rising that the wise men would have been referring to. So from here, now we're going to notice that when we're talking about the star coming out of Jacob, and we're talking about the Leo constellation, is that we're going to turn off the ground, get rid of the points here, and I want to get this as dark as I can for everybody. Get rid of all the background. Maybe hopefully darker is better. And we're going to lock in on Jupiter here, okay? And I'm just going to go forward by day, so try to follow him as best you can. Hopefully those over here, I'm not blocking your view. And we're going to see Jupiter closing in on the first star here in Leo, which is called Regulus. And if you hear the word regal, what does that name mean? King. And in Hebrew, it means what? King in Hebrew, Josh, you're the Hebrew guy. Melech. And Jupiter was called Zedek. Melech, Zedek, Melchizedek. Remember Jesus called Melchizedek over and over in Hebrews in Psalm 110. Now the thing about this is that, you remember how the wise men said, they see the star was moving in the night sky? Okay, and what you're going to see here out of Jupiter is he's moving forward, but eventually he's going to slow down, and this is us looking from the ground level, okay? And he's going to start moving backwards. And this is called retrograde motion, okay? I have a whole example that can be shown, but time again. And this is just, retrograde motion is I'm looking at that star, and every night at the same time, it looks like it moved this way, this way, this way, but then all of a sudden it moves back. And it's just an illusion, but that's just because, hey, where we are on the Earth, and that's the way it looks. So eventually we get a second conjunction of Regulus and Jupiter. And let me do this a little bit quicker. Because you're going to see Jupiter take back off, but again, he slows back down. And again, there's 3 conjunctions of Jupiter and Regulus in 3 BC to 2 BC. And so you have the heliacal rising, you have the king star, the king planet, 3 times touching each other. If you're the wise men, you're like, okay, something's up. And they would have gotten this information because way back, Daniel, when the exile was happening, they would have been fed all this information by him, and this would have been passed down to them and why they were looking for the king of the Jews to come. And so this is the stuff that would have been triggering in their head. Now, back to Revelation, and I brought up Revelation 12. Anybody remember what was the description with the woman? The woman was clothed with the sun, moon at her feet, and 12 stars over her head. Well, who's to the left of Leo? Virgo, the virgin. And her name in the Hebrew zodiac was Betula, which is the Hebrew word for virgin. So we're going to go back to our heliacal rising. And let's see if it's okay. I need to stop that. Okay. Now, the other thing I'm going to add here is the ecliptic. And the ecliptic is the line that it looks like the sun always passes through all the time. It just repeats itself as it's going over. Ooh. I don't want that. I just want the box. There we go. Okay. So we should be fixed. And let's see here. I think I can zoom right there. Okay. So we're going to now watch this move forward. So you see the sun is coming. Here's the sun right at her womb level. She's clothing her. This is ancient astronomy language. Where's the moon? At her feet. In terms of degrees, in a grid, it's at her feet. Now, I can't zoom in, just because all of a sudden there's just going to be a thresh of stars. But observably, just the naked eye stuff, is that above Virgo's head, okay, and I can just turn on the stars here quick, is that there are 12 stars above her head that the naked eye can see. And you can look up this in a star atlas, and it will it'll say this. And so my proposal, and this is others as well, is that when John in Revelation 12 was saying the moon at her feet, the sun clothing her, and the 12 stars above her head, he was talking about the Virgo constellation, and then it said what? The birth of the Messiah came at that point. And when you look at these two together, you have all the language of the king star, you have Jupiter, the king planet, in the Leo constellation, the tribe of Judah, the lion is the king, and then you have the Virgin constellation, is that John was specifically describing that event. And if you look up here, what is the date of that? September 11th. At 6 o'clock at night. And a while back, I got into like the Jewish feasts when we were talking about the Pentecost and so forth. The fall feasts were Rosh Hashanah, tabernacles, and so forth. When you convert September 11th into the Hebrew dates, is that it is Tishri 1, which is Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, in which in their time, and when they crowned kings, this is when they crowned kings and they started the regnal years. And so Jesus, in my view, and others, is that this description from the Bible is describing these events right here, and that he was born on Tishri 1, the Jewish New Year, the Day of the Kings, at roughly 6 o'clock at night when the new day would start for the Jews. And if you think about the shepherds, and the angel said, hey, come worship, what were they told? What were they said doing it? They were shepherding at night. And so all these ideas can come together with a specific date in mind. And yes, there's a lot of debate about it because you don't have that exact language in Luke or Matthew. But when you add them all together, is that, to me, this is an incredible witnessing tool because we can show this, and it's straight out of the Bible, and it is provable using astronomy software. There's a lot more that can get discussed about this whole topic. It's one that I've covered online. It's 2.5 hours in length. So especially the Herod dating death, and then when you get into the census, there's a lot more discussion. What about all the things like Cyrenius? Was he really governor at that time? And so on and so forth. All these things get hashed out in the video that I cover online. But one of the things I would say is that this is one of the proposals by more scholars today. Now, a lot of believers who take this view are like, yeah, this is awesome. I can show you this. A non-believer doesn't want to look. I'm like, I don't want that to be true, because that shows that a divine hand in nature is got it fixed in his control. And Psalm 19 says what? The heavens declare the glory of God. And so maybe down the road I'll cover more of this topic, because as we know, when the wise men get to Jerusalem and they meet with Herod and they go worship Jesus, they said that the star does what? It moves, and then it stood right over Bethlehem. You can show it on here as well. That's a whole another lesson for another day. But all these things I can say is that I truly believe this is the best proposal that is out there for the dating of the death, and that with that I just find it as a great example and witnessing tool. Reminder: hit the subscribe button below, turn on the notification bell, hit the like button, and leave a comment. And don't forget to visit us at justscripture.org. And in the meantime, stay salty.